Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. No, okay. I welcome you on behalf of the IFPDA Board of Directors. I am Carolina Nitsch, Vice President, and we have been celebrating a full month of, thank you. We have been celebrating New York Print Month for a few weeks now with webinars and exhibition tours, and now with panels and conversations here at the Javits during the Print Fair. Today is day 2, and we begin with a talk featuring master printer Jacob Samuel. Along with artists Charline von Heyl and Josiah McElheny. Both of them have gallery shows in New York at James Cohen and Friedrich Petzel. And Josiah also has currently an exhibition at Corbett Dempsey in Chicago. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Esther Adler, who will be moderating this panel. Esther is curator in the Department of Prints and Drawings at the Museum of Modern Art, and she is the organizer of the current exhibition, New Grounds, Jacob Samuel and Contemporary Etching. She also edited the accompanying catalog. The show just opened in New York this week, and I hope you all have a chance to see it while you're here. Esther's past MoMA exhibits include Joseph Joachim, What I Saw, in 2021, Betty Saar, The Legends of Black Girl's Window, which she co-organized with Christoph Scheriks in 2019, and Charles White, A Retrospective in 2018. Esther, you are a real force among contemporary print curators, and we thank you for moderating this panel and in conjunction with MoMA and your show at MoMA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carolina. And I will say that this is the first exhibition I've done where I've actually felt like a print curator. So that's a huge milestone for me. Thank you for coming. I'm thrilled to be talking with Jacob Samuel, Josiah McElheny, and Charline von Heyl, all of whom are a focus of our current exhibition at MoMA. New Ground, nice print pun there, which I'm sure this crowd will get. New Ground, Jacob Samuel, and Contemporary Etching. And so the exhibition is really a celebration of MoMA's collection of over 70 projects published by Jacob Samuel over the course of about a 5-decade career. We acquired the majority of the work in 2015. We have, of course, been collecting Jacob's work with many artists over the decades, but in 2015, we rounded out the collection, and so it's an opportunity to look back at what's really a tremendous legacy in printmaking. And of course, Jacob joins a number of legendary printers and publishers who have been celebrated at MoMA over the years. As Carolina mentioned, the show has just opened, which we're very excited about. And we've used it not only as an opportunity to look at etching, which is a historic medium, which is now being used in lots of interesting ways by contemporary artists, but really also as a way to revisit printmaking in some ways, especially for younger generations of visitors, for new generations of artists who maybe haven't thought about what's so special about making prints and how it can really open up a lot of opportunities. So we're incredibly excited to focus on that. Jacob's earliest work in the exhibition is from 1988, his first project, a published book with the artist Joe Good, and the latest work in the exhibition is a print he made with Jason Moran, I think just in 2022. So a real overview of his work over the course of many decades. And so with that, how this is gonna work is I will start off the conversation. I've got pointed questions for all of the participants. I think we'll have some chat amongst ourselves. We'll probably go for about 40 minutes or so, and then we're happy to open it up for questions. So Jacob, I thought I would start with you. One of the things I often think about when we talk about your work is how influential the artist Sam Francis was. You worked for Francis for over a decade, maybe 14 years.
Actually 18 years, because there was a time when I just worked for him part-time, and then then he asked me to work for him full time.
And I think when I say that, people who know Francis's work often go into the exhibition and are surprised that nothing in there looks anything like Sam Francis's work. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how he influenced the work that you ultimately ended up doing.
Well, the first thing is he was a very interesting guy. He had lots of interests. He was deep into Jungian psychology, and he was into environmentalism early on, and he was really all over the place, and he was traveling the world all the time. So there were lots of people coming through the shop from all different fields, and so that was very influential, number one. He was sort of a magnet for a certain kind of energy. As far as his work went, he asked me back in '76 to, maybe it was '78, I don't remember, to print some plates that he'd made in Japan that he'd never had printed. And I was working and managing a little print studio in Venice at the time. I took him over there and did it, and he liked it. And then he just started asking me to come around and to work with him, but we never worked, and we'd go out to lunch or we'd go for a drive, and that went on for a couple of years. And then he'd call me and he'd say, come on over, and then he'd stretch his canvases, and I think it was just kind of getting to know him. So it really became, his whole scene was like a family of about 5 or 6 people that worked around him. And then finally, I worked at Gemini, and then Sam came in one day and said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, you should just work for me, and so he just fished me out of there. And then that was in '81, and I worked for him until he died in '94. I developed a system of printing with him where I was printing by myself, really large prints, 3 by 5 feet, 35 color aqua tints. And my thing in the way I approach printmaking, the way I approach etching, is the way I approach everything actually, structurally and as if I'm solving a puzzle. So it was a question of figuring out the puzzle for how to do a 35 color aqua tint on a number of plates by myself. Some of the prints were taking like up to 8 hours to print. When he started Lapis Press, which was these limited edition books, and the first one was with him, and then I did one with Edgar Shea and with Richard Long and a few other artists, I really enjoyed working in the small format. I'd always had an interest in old master prints, and I just decided, something? I think I can do this. Actually, my wife, who's sitting in the front here, said, you ought to do this. You're interested in small format, monochromatic, go for it, do it. So, so I I wrote Joe Good a note, and he said he'd like to do it, and that was the beginning of my publishing. And so it was very influenced by Sam in terms of his attitude and in terms of Lapis Press books. But I wanted to take it to a different place that was a little quieter. I printed 120 editions for Sam Francis. I don't have one up in my house. I just don't really go for big color prints.
I think one of the other things I'm always so struck by is how working with an artist like Sam Francis informed how you chose to work with other living artists. So I wondered if you could touch on that a bit.
Very true, Esther. The thing about Sam was I was working in his studio. There was never any pressure. He wasn't that interested in us getting a product. He really didn't care at all. He just liked being around, having things going. He would always show up at the end of the day when nobody was there, and I'd still be there, and would work, in the evenings. And he gave me a lot of freedom because he was out of the country a lot. He was always in Japan or in Europe, and so we developed a real intimacy inside the artist studio. And I could see that the best way to work, for me anyway, to work with artists would be in a very intimate way. So when I set up my studio down by the beach in Ocean Park, it was just one room. It was a storefront, 750 square feet. Just tried to make it as absolutely minimal and low-key as possible. And then I developed this portable studio that was in a crate that I just shipped all over the world, and I worked with a lot of artists, from Buenos Aires to Rome to Berlin to Paris to London. Lots in New York. Did a lot of work in New York, and I didn't have a press, so the artists just had to trust me that I make the plates and I could tell them when they were done. And so there's a lot of trust, a lot of intimacy, and it kind of grew out of working with Sam Francis and being in an artist studio.
So I think I'm now going to ask one of the artists who was able to work with you in this capacity what that was like. Josiah, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up working with Jacob?
Yeah, sure. Jacob approached me, and I was really excited to work with him, but I'd never made really any prints before. And in my memory, I think we had a dialogue of around 2 years before we arrived at the project. And the way I would usually describe it is that basically Jacob wanted there to be an idea that really made sense within the print medium, within etching, that where he could see both the concept and the process conjoining. And he had Jacob had a much more clear vision of that than I did, because I'd never done it before. But during that moment, I also met Mark Pascal at the Art Institute of Chicago, and he kindly showed me around the collection, in the archives, and I looked at many print portfolios there, and that really helped me understand something of a question I think many artists are interested in when they look at an artistic format, is like, what is it for? What does it do? And so basically in that time, I was also learning about some of the tradition of the Kunstverein in Germany before the war, where subscription etchings were given to supporters of the local Kunstvereins. And so I came to understand that a print had three different functions. One was what Jordan Snitcher said yesterday was democratization, so like distribution and access to art. Two was what I would call like a physical image, so image as object. So like the difference between a print is that it's not a reproduction. So a reproduction can give you image, but a print is an object that has a relationship to the body. And that was something that basically brought it home to my experience of making sculpture or painting, where basically for me it's always about what does a human being experience by navigating an artwork themselves, as opposed to it is thinking of an artwork as a kind of fixed thing. And then the third thing was just understanding that a print is kind of like a translator. So basically it's a language, but basically the print process itself is like a live translator. So people talk about like removing the hand, but basically the print always removes the hand. So basically you could, even if you're drawing, the impression process or all of the various aspects of how you're making the plate and then impressing the plate, it's like translating it into a new language. And so for me, that's a really like wonderful thing, because basically you have the opportunity to do your thing, and then you have this other player, this other actor who's then bringing it without any effort on your own part into a new world. And that's partially Jacob, but it's partially also just the process of what a print is. And so that was really, I think, what we were looking for, is like, what could we do that would take an idea that I had into that other world? And so in the end, forgive the length of my answer, it was that we came to, I had seen a white print portfolio by Rosemary Trockle that Mark Pascal showed me, and then I had made a whole series of all white sculptural works, and one silkscreen. That was actually the only other print I had done before, was a silkscreen work, all white. And I had an idea for a cutout work, a silhouette work, and I told Jacob about that, and he said, yes, that's the idea. And he'd always wanted to do a white on white on white work. And I thought that it sounded so difficult to do, but he wanted to take on that challenge. And so I never would have asked anybody to do it, but he wanted to do it. And it was really difficult. So anyway, that's how it happened.
in the mid-'80s, I met Robert Ryman, and I did a bunch of tests for Robert Ryman, and we wound up not working together. But I just always had it in my head, I got to do a white-on-white project, and because I'd done all these test plates, and I knew where to take it, so it was perfect for Josiah because I had that information stored up here.
Josiah, I want to go back to one of the most interesting things you said about the kind of three things that Prince does, and one was about essentially the making of an object, that link between the print and bringing it into the viewer's space in that way. And I think one of the most fascinating things about your prints, and one of the reasons why it's so exceptional to see them in person, which I hope everyone will have the opportunity to do, is because they change as you move, as you look at them, as your space shifts, as the light shifts. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how the way in which the techniques and the media that you and Jacob landed on allowed that to happen.
Yeah, sure. It's I don't know if you really can. I can't see the screen. I can't tell if you can see anything of them. They're when I was looking at, it was so exciting to see them at MoMA just now, and they're lit and presented so beautifully. When I look at them, I don't understand them. Like every time I look at them, I'm like, what is happening? But basically, they're not lenticular, so they're not some funny trick. But basically, they're something that, when you look straight on, it might completely disappear. When you look just a little bit to the left, or shift your legs, or shift your eyes, shift your head, basically they may look extremely graphic, like there's a black line. And then you may move a little farther to the left or to the right again, and then it may disappear again. And what's very odd about it is that absolutely nothing is happening. Nothing is changed. It's simply what Jacob, when we were talking about it, Jacob knew that the way that physicality of the ink would behave, all it's doing is that the thickness of the ink is like a mountain. And basically, as light falls off the edge of the mountain, depending on where you are in relationship to it, basically you see something or you don't. Now, of course, you're still seeing fields of white, which are very, very, I think, beautiful, warm, differentiated whites, but the form that you're seeing is only revealed by motion. And for me, it's actually kind of become a kind of, in the world of where every aspect of global capitalist society says that dematerialization is the ultimate goal of all humanity, I think one purpose of art is to counter that and say that no, human bodies are necessary, and actually what they experience as unique experience in any one moment is essential. And so the way you move and think while you're moving is one thing that art can do, i.e. encourage thought in physical motion. It sounds so basic, but I feel like it's actually counter to what most of society is asking us to do. So the other aspect of the piece that I would say is that, for me, interesting, is that James Welling at the opening was asking me, is it photographic based? And it's absolutely not. It's basically, and it's interesting that he thought it was, it's simply a silhouette of a shape, a real shape that was made in probably hundreds or thousands of examples during the 20th century. They're based on design objects. And basically, it's based on the tradition of mold making, where they would take scissors and make a half cutout out of cardstock. And you can make an incredibly beautiful, if you're very good at it, with very short scissors, you can make an incredibly beautiful curve that way, a highly compound curve, like thousands of compound curves in association with each other. And then you double that, and then you make out of that a three-dimensional mold, and out of that you make a three-dimensional object. But that kind of line doesn't really ever exist in any real way. It becomes another shape. So in my piece, what I did is that the horizontal lines are made based on as if you're looking down at the object. The middle lines are made as if you're looking straight on, and the upper lines are as if you're looking up at the object. And then the side is basically as close as I could make to the original, the final shape. So it's actually kind of like almost cubist line and it's you would never get that unless I told you, but it does, as you're moving around, it weirdly seems like subtly, like the thing is a kind of articulated or almost slightly three-dimensional space, even shape, even though it's all it is a silhouette with no line. It's just the shape of a piece of white, and that's it. There's nothing else. It's very odd that all that alone could do that much.
Yeah, and I think I will say in terms of, Jacob Samuel has made a lot of work, and it was an ongoing struggle to decide what we were going to focus on in the exhibition because it was all so great. But because Josiah's work is so exceptional, but yet so hard to see in some ways, unless you have the opportunity to really face it in person, that was one of the reasons why I knew from very early on that we wanted to really present that for our visitors to see. Charline von Heyl's work is the other work I knew that I wanted to include because it is just such an exceptional, joyful, interesting portfolio, and because it has everything you want as someone trying to explain etching to a general audience in it. You can literally see every single tool, every kind of etching 101 situation within it, and it's done so expertly and so beautifully. And so, Charline, you spoke really beautifully about why you like making etchings and what it is that etching does for your work as opposed to other types of media. So I wondered if you could expand on that a bit for us.
Yes. For me, I came very late to printing, and the reason for that was that I always had this vision of printing being this thing where you are working not only with somebody but also for somebody who wants something from you, who wants to have an edition, who wants to, that you are actually also part of somebody else's, that you have a responsibility for somebody else. And I'm so obsessed with this idea of being free in the work that I didn't know how to deal with that until I met Rob Swainston. And we did this whole summer where he taught me to do every single technique, like litho, like lots of woodcuts, and I would even start in my studio putting some drawing or color on paper, bring all the paper to the studio, then we put one woodcut on it, then we would put some tape on it, then we take the tape off, then we print on top of that, then we take the tape. It was this kind of, and it was no edition, it was really work, and MoMA has a series of them, and it was incredibly liberating to work like that, and I realized that it's super fun to work together with somebody who has the same vibe. And so my mind suddenly also was completely tuned into the fact that the way I paint has so much to do with printing to begin with, because I'm thinking in layers, and that this is something that I'm really interested in. But at the same time, that whole program, because I did use it in a way that I was painting into the thing, I was collaging into it, it still felt not, it didn't have that auratic quality that I always had my personal desire kicked off with print. And I still think one of the very few things that really carries that auratic quality is etching. And etching was the one thing that we did not do, of course, in this, because it's a whole other ballpark of work and intensity, as we know. So some time passed, and then I did with big envy see that Christopher made etchings, and they had exactly this point where you just do marks, of some kind, and those marks, just because they are understood by two different people to convey something through the medium of etching, and it can only be etching. It wouldn't work as a drawing. And then it is more than just an etching. It has this crazy power. As an object, as you said. I think you talked really, really well about all this, and it's kind of very illuminating, and exactly that. But then Jacob also offered to do something with me, and that was really, then it really was this thing, okay, now I'm going to do printing. You're like, of course that was printing what we did before, and it was something that where I made printing mine, but this was going back to my own, now I also know, misunderstanding of printing, where it is something that I do for somebody else and not just for me. And of course I knew also that Jacob would be the one who is married to the medium of etching in a way like nobody else, who really brings out that auratic quality in everybody and is also looking for projects where a minimum of presence creates a maximum of aura and of object at the same time, which is amazing. And but I hadn't done any etching before, and that you very rightly pointed out that you're like, and that's exactly what happened, that I did try out every damn tool there was. But because I also didn't want to just do a gestural and nincompoop thing, and I wanted to kind of match the idea of aura. I did something that I usually don't do at all. I came in there with an idea, of a sort of a story, because I knew we would do a portfolio of some sort. And I thought something that would be matching it was the story of Harry Crosby, who was one of the who was obsessed with printing, and who was the one who invented what's a very beautiful when you print poems in with those little stamp things, letterprint. So he was an editor of printing, and he put all the classics, Joyce, whatever, and it was a Black Sun editions. And he was at the same time somebody who was Boston Brahman, unbelievably beautiful boy who very early on was looking for an adventure everywhere. And the letterpress thing was an aesthetic adventure that he brought to an extreme, but at the same time he went into all other extremes. And one of the extremes was his sun-worshipping idea and his obsession with death and his obsession with wanting to fly an airplane into the sun and die like that. And the book about him is a fantastic book. I really recommend it. It's now out in a New York Review of Books in a new edition. It's called
I have the picture. I have the picture up on the screen.
It is there. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
It is a wonderful book, I have to say.
And I had, my friend Jacqueline Humphreys gave it to me, and it was she was obsessed with this book when she was young, and of course, so I was obsessed with that book too, and then I thought it would be working, and that actually is feeding the whole thing, this desire, this idea of desire, and the slipper, just every single thing has, for me, is an abstraction of desire, like the way that a tiny black shape can stand out in this perfect way, in the way that you have the desire for the white on white. I tried with every single thing to the yellow chine coulée under it gives it already like this other presence. And so yes, I could live out something that I didn't think I could, but I also for the first time made an etching, and I made several etchings, and I realized that I would not in a million years have been able to do it, of course, without working together. And I was fascinated with the way that as a master printmaker, you are somebody who is an artist, and it is but you have to take yourself out of it. You have the way that you cannot even say I like this. During the process, you can push a tool into my direction that is going to be perfect thing, but you cannot. And then as an artist, of course, you hunger for this, but at the same time, you also know that you get really pissed off if you like something and somebody else doesn't at that moment when you're just doing it. So it is really a weird way of working together with somebody. And I felt this crazy freedom working with him. And at the same time, I was completely restricted because I knew that he was super, super, super earnest and strict about what we can do and what we can't do. And I had to trust him. But it was a fantastic experience.
Charline, you have set me up perfectly for my next question, which is that Jacob Samuel, early on in working together, told me he thought etching was the most flexible of medium. And I don't know if he remembers, but I really looked at him like I thought he was crazy, because how is there any flexibility in this medium? And not only that, but Jacob's practice by nature has had very strict parameters in some ways. The prints are of a certain scale. They are, for the most part, printed in single color ink, I should say, and they are, for the most part, serial. And what I found fascinating is how different the work is, given that Jacob was working in etching within all of these parameters. So Jacob, I wonder, given how different Josiah and Charlene's work is, and how they've both spoken a little bit about how you were able to meet them where they were with the project ideas, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Of course. There's so many different kinds of artists. I've worked all together with about 100 artists and published 70. And the thing is, everybody works in a different way, so I have to just understand the medium pretty thoroughly. So, and I research everything before I work with anybody. I mean, I used to really take about 10 years to know somebody's work before I approach them. And then as I developed it, it maybe went down to 5 years or 4 years. And then with Charline, it was actually very different, to tell you the truth, because she was giving a talk at UCLA when I was teaching at UCLA. She was giving a talk at the Hammer. And because I work with Christopher so much.
And just for those of you who don't know, this is Christopher Wohl, who is Jacob's most published artist and also Charline von Heyl's husband.
Yeah, and so I thought, Charlene's going to give a talk. Christopher will probably be there. That'll be great. Get to say hi. And he wasn't there, and I stayed for Charlene's show, and her slideshow blew me away. It totally blew me away. And I was like, I want to work with this woman. I mean, she has so many different ideas. What I like so much about her work is that she goes all over the place, and she makes it work. And she throws in these little figurative things, and she's super abstract, and she's a colorist, and so I like that she kind of melts the boundaries down. Anyway, she was very open to working with me, and that was great. The metaphor that I like to use about working with artists, and having spent so many years or decades and literally tens of thousands of hours doing this, is when I'm looking all the time at artwork, and I'm looking for something that really engages me. But I want to use a sports metaphor. I'm looking for a pitch I can drive. Okay, and when I saw their work, I thought there's that possibility. So that's really what I'm looking for. And Charline, first of all, Josiah was wonderful, because I said earlier I like puzzles. So printing white on white on white is a puzzle, particularly because there's a transparency to the ink. So I ordered this paper from Japan, from Hiromi in Japan. And it had to be triple bleached and triple washed, and then it had to be picked out, by the paper mill to make sure it was perfect, right? But when it came, it wasn't perfect. So we had to spend 3 weeks, my assistant Eric Zeman and I, picking with a razor blade out these little bits of red, whatever it was, we didn't know, and then we figured it out, that the building was made out of brick, and so there was brick dust constantly falling. No matter how much they bleached and washed the paper, there was still brick dust in it. So we just sat there at the table with some really quiet music on. No, it's fine. No, are you kidding? I live for this stuff. See, my whole deal is this. I just like going to work every day. And so I just figure it doesn't really matter what it is. It's an activity, and I go and I do that activity. And then I go on to the next activity, and it just suits my nature to have an activity to do. So, okay, for 3 weeks, we're going to sit there with single edge razor blades, and we're going to very carefully lift out brick dust. So with Charline, it's a whole other thing, because she had this idea of the Harry Crosby thing, and I fell into that immediately because my wife and I are just really interested in Paris in the 20s. She's taught courses on it, and so it was just right up our street. And the other thing that was great is her willingness just to be an absolute etching animal. I mean, she was just, you know, working and going for it. We're pulling proofs, and then I give her another tool, and I gave her this big, you know, 16-penny nail to do dry point, and she was like, yeah, she was right with it. So, you know, the relationship that happens when I'm working on a project is different with every artist. Having the portable studio and like traveling all over the world was great because it was wherever situation I was in, it was completely spontaneous, no matter who I was working with when I was on the road. So I like that. It's a challenge, and I never had one, you know, go south on me. So that says something.
I don't know if there are questions from the audience. I would love to open it up if anyone has any burning questions. I can also keep going because I have many. Sure, Marcia.
One of the things I really admire about Jacob, because I've been able to watch him work, I live in Southern California, is your openness. And so you pivot and work with someone who I have never heard of or seems counterintuitive. How's that going to work, Josiah? I was thinking that about you. How are those glass, you know, how's that going to go into work on paper? Can you talk about how your interests open up, and then stacks of books arrive, and you do your research?
Yeah, you know, I grew up in LA in the 50s. I was very fortunate. My sister, who's in the audience, worked at David Stewart Gallery, which was one of the only galleries in LA at the time that was showing contemporary work. Via Selman's had her first show there. It was just down the street from Ferris. So I've been looking at art all my life, and, you know, I don't know, I could say the art world saved me in a lot of ways because I always had something to focus on, and wherever I went, I just looked at art. And I wasn't really, I mean, art and surfing, that was about it. And so, you know, I just had you know, I have a very educated eye only because I spent my whole life looking at stuff. And LA was a really fertile place in the 60s and 70s for ideas and for outside-the-box thinking. So I got used to being challenged by people who are trying stuff with different materials. You know, from the finish fetish stuff of like Larry Bell and Peter Alexander and Irwin and, you know, Maria Nordman, you know, going to that stuff all the time. Of course, you got Chris Burden, seeing his, you know, early sculptural stuff, you know, and so it just all kind of resonates and just, and then they had this other incredible resource, which was Lee Kaplan's bookstore Arcana. I knew Lee from Rhino Records, where he worked, and you know, then he started producing these music concerts. Then he made this pivot, as we say, and he started becoming an art book dealer, and he was dealing them out of his house, and, you know, I'd go to his house and look at stuff, and he'd find stuff for me. But during the real fertile period in the 80s and 90s, I was in Lee's bookstore all the time because he had everything from Europe coming in. You know, it was like Yap Reitman in Soho in the 70s. It was that kind of a place where you just find stuff. And so then that would open things up, and I was very interested, you know, in certain aspects of conceptual art. I wasn't that interested in performance art, really, but I liked the cleanliness and brevity of conceptual art. I liked the humor as well, and because there's a lot of really funny stuff. And then, you know, there was just full-on painting, you know, and you know, like Ed Ruscha or Ed Moses or Joe Good. I went to every show by these guys. And then San Francisco, when, you know, I met him, and we just hit it off. And I was a kid in my 20s, and he just invited me to hang around, and he'd call me up, like I said, he'd say, come on over, and he'd bring all your equipment, and we're going to do some project, and then we'd just go for a drive, and he'd just talk about art. And we had this dialogue, so it was all very natural. And I kind of feel that in a certain way, I was groomed to do this by the city and by my environment. I mean, when I was like 11, I used to, all the galleries on La Cienega, and I go look at the galleries. And I remember this one time, you know, La Cienega, most of you have been on La Cienega, the big hill coming down from Sunset Boulevard to Beverly, and I used to do that on my bike, and I used to do it on my skateboard. But in the windows on a Sunday morning, they'd have, the art would be displayed. And I remember seeing etchings by Rico Lebrun back in like, when I was 12, and thinking, this is really interesting. This is an interesting looking thing. Another thing, where do I find things? This is all percolates. My sister was a friend of Marvin Hardin at UCLA. He gave her an etching, and she brought home this etching. And I was fascinated by it because it was so tough. It was like Charlene's work. It was super bad. It was super tough. You know, it was like dry point, big gouges and bleeding lines. And, you know, I'm just a kid. And all that stuff resonated with me. I thought it was cool. And, you know, and then going to art and focusing on it kept me sane during all the hippie years because there was so much crap around. And it was great to be able to, like, see stuff that was, you know, really focused and had this base in history. So that was my education. And then when I went to art school, there's this other thing that's really, really important. Two things, because photography was my thing. First one was zone system photography, which is creating the perfect grayscale from black to white with 10 tones in between, okay? That was one pole of the aesthetic. The other pole was called nominal subject matter, which was, this is Bay Area in the early 70s. Content was irrelevant. Okay, I was raised in this environment where content was irrelevant. The story was irrelevant. What was relevant was how good you did the thing. You know, it didn't matter what it was, it had to be done right. So that's kind of where I was schooled, and that's what I was looking for. So when I look at the two completely different poles of different universes of these two wonderful artists' work, for me, it's a matter, and because you asked me how do I, like, lock it into the medium, I look at their work and I see a possibility within the medium. That's all. And like, you know, if you look at the show at MoMA that Esther curated, for me, it all hangs together because I'm a formalist. I'm a structuralist. Story is secondary. It's just not my thing. If I want a story, I read a book, okay?
Yeah, Josiah, do you want to jump in?
All right, I got a question. I want to push back a little bit. So I think if I had to pick out like one artwork out of all the artworks in the world that might be one of the most important artworks, it would be the print portfolio Disasters of War.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And that, if that's not a story, I don't know what it is. What a story is, and I think that what I appreciate about your work is that actually every one of those print portfolios is a story, and that basically each one of them is in dialogue with the disasters of war, in the sense of each one of them is telling a kind of a history of something, a kind of cinema of something. And
beautiful. And
I think that when I was working with you, the thing that crystallized it for me was 8 Dead Twos by Matt Mullican, and you showed me that, and that's when I understood what a print portfolio could be as an artwork and what you were trying to do, and that's what made me to want to be a part of it and be connected with you. And I've seen lots of Matt's work, but the way that the 8 Dead Twos of another human being inhabiting another human being, creating this wildness that's contained in this box that you can access and open up and be transported by. You made that happen, and you made that happen with many, many artists, and basically each of those is a complete story. So you did that, and every one of those is an artwork and an incredible thing.
No, I appreciate that, believe me. That's Josiah's take, though, okay? That's not my take. Like I said, I'm looking for a pitch I can drive, okay? And so for me, the deal with Matt Mulliken's project was, first of all, I loved that he made art under hypnosis. I loved that he was from Santa Monica Canyon. I loved that there was this whole relationship between his father and his mother in San Francisco. I loved that it was from that period. And I love that Matt walked from Santa Monica Canyon to my studio. And so, there was that. And whatever he wanted to do was fine. What was cool about that project for me was the hallucinatory quality of it, because we took this graph paper and blew it up big digitally and then printed it. And then we did the same thing with some legal pad, so it had the surrealistic quality. So, and then putting these super black aqua tints on it, and the story's good, and that's fine. But I'm glad there's stories with everything, but they're not that relevant to me. That's all. I want the print to just absolutely, pardon me, kick ass. That's all. I want it to be tough, and I want it to be difficult. I want Mona Hatoum's prints to be really hard to look at. I like that. I like things that are really, really quiet. I like things that have a lot of detail. I like things that unfold. Charlene's prints, there's so much you can look at in them. That's why they're fun for me. And I know there's a Harry Crosby thing, but if it was just, relating that story of Harry Crosby, it just wouldn't be that relevant to me. I like that she worked so hard, And with Josiah, the opportunity to work with a glass artist, that's something that's ephemeral, that's a combination of completely ephemeral and really physical. The experience of looking at his work, and also, it's interesting, I'm not some, moron about this. The whole thing he did with glass history, and the whole thing about white modernism, and the whole thing about 5 male and 5 female glass artists, I like all that, but it all falls away when you're making this stuff. Because all that matters is getting it right. So that's my job. That's my job.
That's a hard act to follow, but if there are other questions.
I'll try. First of all, concerning looking for a pitch to drive, the Yankees are looking for you. I love the idea of process in art, and you talk about the process. Also, I'm interested in how artists who work in etching or printing create value by limiting the edition. But I also realize, having done it, that if you print an edition of 10, it's really 10 editions of one, because each one is a little different. It's not a clone. So could you talk a little bit about the concept of number of editions and why, the first print is different in many ways than the fourth print, but it's still in the same idea of an edition?
Okay, I understand what you said. I did this edition of like 60 prints for Ed Ruscha, and when he signed them, he looked at me at the end and he said, "They're all the same." And I said, "Isn't that the point?" And he said, "No, nobody ever gets this. Nobody ever gets them all the same." So that's what I'm talking about. My job is to get them all the same. And it's a fugitive medium because, it can break down, particularly dry point. But, that's why I had a steel facing bath in my studio. And I just try to make them all the same. Because I think that's a discipline, and I'm a guy who needed a lot of discipline in his life. I did this partly as therapy.
Were there other, I think there's someone in the center. On or out.
Oh, thanks. This is short and basic. Could you talk about ink, particularly black ink? Do you have a favorite ink or inks?
That's a great question.
It is.
Oh. My kind of question. All right. Black inks are made out of a lot of different materials. Okay, there's bone black, there's vine black, there's this great. Anyway, I use black ink depending on the project. I have an array of black inks. For instance, Charbonnel Lux C, okay, is perfect for plate tone, and it's just got just a touch of warmth in it. So sometimes you want to cool that down, so you mix it with some Gamblin. And Gamblin makes like 5 different blacks, so you have all those to choose from. I used to use Lafranc quite a bit, but I pretty much stayed within Gamblin and Charbonnel. However, when I worked for San Francisco, we had a guy who made inks for us named Dan Citron, and so he made a lot of inks for us, and he had this ink that he called Copper Complex Black, and there was never a black. It was $250 a jar. It was super thick and super dense. So for some projects, I used that when you wanted a black that would just be like a black hole. For Charlene's was Gamblin. I can't remember the name of this exact ink. I can't right now. But it was a Gamblin ink. I liked it. And actually Josiah's ink too. It was a mixture of Gamblin covering white and Blanc Corvant from Lafranc. So yeah, I mean, it's just the whole thing. It's fun, You look at a lot of different inks and you get to know their characteristics, and you try different inks with different plates and see if they work. Interesting. David Musgrave's project, which is this really fine line project, was like, black just didn't work, and I printed them in graphite. But it reads like black, and it had to do with the density of the ink. I used to use a lot of oil of clove when I was mixing inks, because it kept the ink fresh on the palette, and also it kept it with a nice viscosity. A lot of times I use different weights of burnt plate oil. I think so. Up at Crown Point, they made their own inks out of pigment, and some people did that. I never felt a need to do that. I was very trusting of the ink makers and especially the French ink makers. I mean, Charbonnel, really, really great.
Are there other questions? I just wanted to close the panel by asking Josiah and Charlene how this experience of working with Jacob changed either printmaking or any other aspect of your practice.
Well, since I have been working, and I have to say, those 2 first experiences, first with Rob, then with Samuel, set me on a path where I'm addicted to print. And not only making it, also looking at it, I think it is one of the craziest, underrated things in the art world. I think that most artists, and I'm talking, like hundreds of years, are bringing some of their best into printmaking and take it all serious, and the audience seems to always think that it's some kind of side project, which it really is not. And so I have been continuing to print. I just did fantastic print. Brian Barry is a master printer that I'm working with right now at ULAE, and we have put out a ton of prints right now, and they're amazing. And so it really put me on that path, and especially with etching now, because that just is somehow the most serious and the sexiest. It has both. So I just want to go on with that. So thank you, Samuel. Oh, I don't have to take that. Do you have your own? Yeah, there actually two of them are here.
Josiah?
Well, I would just say that if I had to pick out any one work that I've made out the past 30 years just to represent what I've done as like my favorite piece, it would probably be this piece. So I think it's one of the best things I've ever done, and I've never considered it a print project. It's just a work I've done, and so I'm just super grateful to you, and
It goes both ways.
so it has inspired me to keep going, and I think it's made me completely misunderstand what printmaking is. I have then gone on to do, tried to do similar portfolio projects in photogravure and in letterpress, and have loved doing that. And I'm proud of those projects, but they're not the same just because I had wonderful people to work with, but I didn't have the kind of rigorous, disciplined person you are to as a leader.
And I am so grateful to all three of these incredible speakers for joining me here, and to all of you for joining us in the audience. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the fair.